Hi everyone, Bruno here. Welcome to my channel on This and That. In this video, I will give my perspective on the Russia-Ukraine war. From what we have been able to read and hear from the media, we haven't really been able to get a full picture on what is actually going on. All we are able to hear is that it is all Russia's fault and they are solely to blame. But there is a bit more to this, which I will explain in this video. Now my video will be laid out in 3 parts. I will cover the Maidan Revolution in 2014, the real reason the US and the West are quote-unquote supporting Ukraine, and why Russia eventually opted for the invasion, or how they are calling it, special operation. I have used various sources to prepare this presentation, which links I include in the description box below. Okay, let's get into it. Part 1. The 2014 Maidan Revolution. What led to Russia's invasion in February 2022 is a direct result of the results of the Maidan Revolution in 2014. Maidan led to an installation of a pro-Western government and the removal of the pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych. The Maidan Revolution, also known as the Revolution of Dignity, took place in Kiev in February 2014. The demonstration involved clashes between protesters and police with deadly incidents, and eventually it resulted in the protesters taking control of the government buildings. There is a good Netflix documentary on this, worth watching. You get to see how the revolution actually looked like. It's called Winter on Fire, Ukraine's Fight for Freedom. Now there are 2 sides to Maidan, and both have an element of truth in it. The first side, Maidan was the expression of the Ukrainian people to distance itself from Russia and its influence, and to go its own way. And the other side is that Maidan was orchestrated by the West to further diminish Russia's influence in Ukraine. The Maidan Revolution was a result of a culmination of demonstrations known as Euromaidan across Ukraine that started at the end of 2013. These demonstrations commenced after the then President Yanukovych decided to end the association agreement with the EU and forge closer ties with Russia. As mentioned, the ultimate result of the Maidan was an installation of a new pro-Western government and the removal of Yanukovych from power. Overall, Maidan was a disappointment to Ukraine, as it merely replaced one set of oligarchs with another. As a result of Maidan, Ukraine has become a more progressive, pro-Western country with a large US military presence, but it has also become a very economically deprived country. The quality of life has greatly diminished since 2014. It is estimated that more than 1 million people left Ukraine in search for a better life since 2014. Also, Maidan ultimately brought to power the current President Volodymyr Zelensky. While Western media are presenting Zelensky favorably as a democratic politician, his actions haven't really been democratic. Here are some actions Zelensky has taken since he has been in power. He retired the president of the Constitutional Court, who was acting as a check on his laws. He closed 7 opposition TV channels. He arrested and accused of treason the leader of the Platform of Opposition. He is also placing on trial for treason former President Poroshenko. The mayor of Kiev, the popular former world boxing champion Vitaly Klitschko, has also been subjected to several searches and seizures. Now that we understand the Western involvement in Ukraine since 2014, perhaps our understanding of the conflict will become a bit more sophisticated. Part 2. Reasons why the West is supporting Ukraine. What we need to be aware of is that the US and the West are not supporting Ukraine and its people, rather using Ukraine as a tool in its ongoing battle against Russia. What we can say is Ukraine has become the new battlefield between NATO and Russia since 2014. Below I list some reasons why the West, with the US leading the way, want to weaken Russia, predominantly by sanctions, and have used Ukraine, and consequently destabilized the country, in the last decade to achieve this. Russia's de-dollarization. One of the major reasons why Russia has aggravated the US is Russia's move away from the US dollar. Here are some facts on Russia divesting from the US dollar. US Treasury securities. If we look at the table of the major foreign holders of US Treasury securities as of September 2021, Russia is not even on the list. Russia dumped its US Treasury holdings in March of 2018. Around 2012, holdings of US Treasuries were over $150 billion. The value of US Treasury securities held by residents of Russia reached approximately $3.9 billion in December 2021. So, quite a decrease in the holdings. Russia has been on a buying spree buying gold. The Bank of Russia spent 6 years rapidly accumulating gold, doubling its holdings and becoming the biggest sovereign buyer. Russia has more than 2,000 tons of gold at the end of January. According to data from the International Monetary Fund, it's the 5th biggest sovereign gold owner globally. So you can see why the US would be nervous. By moving away from US Treasuries into gold, Russia is setting an example which could deal a major blow to the US if other countries follow suit. Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Nord Stream 2 is a 1,200 kilometer pipeline under the Baltic Sea, which will take gas from the Russian coast near St. Petersburg to Lubmin in Germany. Nord Stream 2 runs parallel to an existing pipeline, Nord Stream, which has been working since 2011. Together, these two pipelines could deliver 110 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe every year. That is over a quarter of all the gas that European Union countries use annually. Note that Germany already imports 35% of its gas it needs from Russia. Now, Europe last month held its spot as the top importer of US liquefied natural gas for a third month in a row, taking nearly 3/4 of exports. So you can see why the US would be against this project, as it would eventually mean less US gas exports to Europe. That is why the US has tried to block Nord Stream 2, and has done this by predominantly imposing sanctions on Russian companies involved in the project. Currently, Germany has suspended Nord Stream 2 since Russia recognized the two eastern Ukraine breakaway states. Russia forging ties with China. Russia forming such close ties to China and its move away from G7 pose a risk to US primacy on the global stage. China and Russia currently enjoy the best relations they have had since the late 1950s. Although they have no formal alliance, the two countries do have an informal agreement to coordinate diplomatic and economic moves and build up an alliance against the United States. So what I have just listed above, Russia's de-dollarization, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, Russia forging ties with China, is paving the way for Russia to get on the global stage and to become a major player, which obviously is a risk to the United States. Part 3. Why Russia ultimately opted for invasion. This invasion was actually planned out and on the table by Russia since 2014, after the annexation of Crimea. They were just waiting for the right moment. Russia opted for the invasion as it wanted to achieve the following: ultimately cut its ties and end any hope of it becoming part of the Western civilization, establish itself further as its own Orthodox/Russian civilization. This Russian civilization will be one of the major players in the coming multipolar world, given we are moving away from a unipolar world under US rule. Many will say that the ultimate reason for the invasion was the threat of Ukraine joining NATO. While this definitely is a reason, it is not the ultimate reason. We already mentioned that Ukraine is a battlefield between NATO and Russia. But why did Putin ultimately decide to confront NATO in Ukraine and not any of the other former satellite USSR countries? Putin stated in his national address to the nation that Russia has historical and spiritual ties with Ukraine, claiming that modern Ukraine can be called, quote-unquote, Vladimir Lenin's Ukraine, as it is an artificial country created by the Bolsheviks under Lenin. For Russia to set itself on the world stage and claim a seat in the coming multipolar world, it needed to undertake this invasion and remove the US from Ukraine, especially because Ukraine is perceived by Russia as the heart of the Russian identity. Hence why Russia was not allowed for Ukraine to fall under US influence any further. This also explains why Russia did not undertake an invasion of any of the other former Warsaw Pact countries that joined NATO, including the former Soviet Union Baltic countries. Conclusion. Okay, some concluding remarks. To finish up, note that Russia and Ukraine have a long intertwined complex history, and I think it is difficult, if not impossible, for Westerners to form valid opinions on the moral merits of each cause, since both Ukrainian nationalists and Russian separatists bear some validity. This is the harsh reality of multi-ethnic states, where the population is divided on self-assertion and self-determination. However, the Russian invasion is an act of aggression against a sovereign state, and is therefore an unjust war, in all its expressions. It has become apparent that While the Ukrainian army is no match for Russia, the Ukrainian army has managed to stand off the invasion quite well, and it appears that Russia has not achieved its objective as quickly as they wanted to. The front has steadily advanced from the south, the north, and the east, with a cauldron steadily forming around the most battle-ready Ukrainian units deployed in the east along the front line of the Donetsk People's Republic. There have been reports that Zelensky is up for negotiations with Putin, and some peace negotiations have already taken place about Ukraine becoming a neutral country, so let's hope for a prompt agreement and the end to this war. What has Russia really achieved here to date since the invasion? Will the people of Ukraine, even if they are Russophile, support this invasion? Millions of Ukrainians have been dislocated because of the war, and there have been countless deaths on both sides. With an already strained relationship between the two nations, it appears as if this was the last straw and reconciliation will never be able to be achieved. There's no going back after this. If anything, Putin has now confirmed the Ukraine is as its own nation, something he was actually trying to abolish with this invasion. Just to finish up with a few points. When following the news on this, keep in mind that the first victim of each war is the truth, and the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is a very dangerous trap that has been set against Ukraine, Russia, and the nations of Europe. Second, the West is not interested in Ukraine's well-being and its current sufferings the way the media is presenting it. Rather, this is primarily a geopolitical matter relating to the ongoing battle between the West and Russia, with Ukraine as the battlefield and the victims being the Ukrainian people who are stuck in the middle. And another thing, on a more personal level, get your finances straight. This is extremely important, as this war will have implications on each country by way of price increases. You can start by investing in wealth preservation assets, gold and silver for example, to hedge the inflation. I will be doing a series on budgeting where we'll speak further on this. Also, there are reports of potential food shortages, so it's a good idea to stockpile some food. Okay, that's it. Hope this video helped in clarifying the situation that's going on in Russia and Ukraine a bit further. Thanks for watching my video. All the best, and talk soon.